Folks, welcome back to So Bad It's Good, presented by Betches Media. Today, we truly have this very special guest, someone who spent decades at the intersection of law and media. She has brought us just unparalleled insight into some of the most high-profile cases of our time. She's a former prosecutor, a veteran legal analyst, and a trusted voice in investigative journalism. You've seen her on Court TV, CNN, and countless true crime documentaries. And of course, you have seen her work on The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. But we have a new show that premiered in January. All 6 episodes are available for streaming now on Max. It is The Curious Case of, and our guest today is Beth Karras. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
I've always just really admired your work. You're somebody that I've watched, and I hate to say that I'm a fan of your work because your work is so intense. Just to remind the audience, how did you get to this point where you are on television when you started off behind the scenes, actually doing the work?
You know, I never intended to get into journalism. Of course, I was always a big reader and interested in the news, but it just sort of fell in my lap because when I was an assistant DA, the man who would eventually start Court TV ended up trailing me around the office with my boss's permission, sort of following my day-to-day activities for a few weeks. And he ended up writing a big article for a trade journal called American Lawyer Magazine with me on the cover, looking at problems in the criminal justice system sort of through my eyes. So that was my break, because a few years later, 3 years later or so, he was launching Court TV, and he asked me to join. I didn't join when it launched in 91, but I did join in 1994 on the 3rd anniversary. I wanted to practice for a while and become a better lawyer, so I practiced for 8 years. Then I joined Court TV, and I was there for 19 years. Who knew?
And Court TV really was, a younger audience might not know how powerful that was at the time because we had nothing else like that on television. That was truly groundbreaking. And now we see that all the time. But back then it was truly unique.
Correct. We did not have streaming services. We did not have Twitter, X, Facebook, any of the social media platforms. In fact, the summer I was covering the Scott Peterson trial in 2004, the Zuckerberg, who was establishing Facebook, he was about 2 miles from me. I was living in a hotel in Palo Alto, and he was in Palo Alto that summer developing Facebook. And then a year later, Twitter would come out. And you could never cover a trial the same after that. But
yeah,
TV kind of had a corner of the market at that point. They weren't local news. They weren't streaming on their websites the way they do today. You can find a trial on YouTube. None of that was around when we started.
Yeah, no, it is a different time now, and everything is just so, news travels so fast, pop culture moves so fast. And this Curious Case series is so interesting because it is that intersection of pop culture and crime and just really like unique stories, some of which I had heard about, some of which I had never heard about. And kind of like the Doomsday Cat Cult, which is your season finale. I had never heard about this story. And could you tease the audience of what this 6th episode is about? Because it's an hour and 22 minutes. It's an extended episode, and I had never heard of this.
So it's double in length from the rest of except for the opener of Bam Margera.
Yeah.
We give that a little extra time because it is a complicated story to tell. This is a woman, a self-proclaimed prophet named Cheryl Ruthven, who was never particularly religious, according to her former husband, her ex-husband, who was part of our show. But she just kind of went down a rabbit hole after meeting a woman who had her own church in the Pacific Northwest. And she decided she wanted to start her own church. And she did have developed a following of people. And like any cult, she started basically dictating their lives, and they had to give money to her. They had to do what she said. They started being cut off from family and friends. It's just typical cult behavior. And then she moved them across the country to Tennessee. She split up families. And she wanted to, she allegedly wanted to have her ex-husband killed. That didn't happen. But it's just very dark. And the cat part comes from her belief that cats are the vessel when the Armageddon happens, or
the cats cats could communicate divine messages, controlling their decisions and their finances. And I know I have a lot of people in my life that have a lot of cats. So I was like, this is right up your alley. But it is wild that this was the basis of what she was telling her followers.
Yes, it didn't start being cats, but it developed into that. And that's what it is now. And they have to, the members have to adopt these cats from shelters, and they have to care for the cats even before they care for themselves or their children. And then maybe there are 30 cats in a house, and so it's smelly, and they cost a lot of money, and it's just it's a little.
Well, and I'm smiling right now as we're talking about it, but it's like a very kind of intense story because you realize how susceptible people are. And, there's great found footage and archival footage of, this lady. And I was just like, how did, I'm watching it and I'm like, I don't think I could be fooled by this. I don't think I would ever, but people were.
Well, it is amazing, right? I mean, when you study cults, and I don't purport to be an expert in this, but I have dabbled in enough of them from the outside as a reporter to know that there are ways to mold people's minds. And one of the ways is sleep deprivation, putting people on a weird schedule. And so, you can start making them believe anything. I don't know that the sleep deprivation was occurring here because they didn't all live with her at one point, at least in the beginning, but that is a way to shape people's minds.
Yeah, it's truly fascinating. And each 6 of these episodes are really interesting because you have Jodie Hildebrandt, you have The Funeral Home of Horrors, The Orphan Imposter, The Girl Who Died Twice, and you started off the season with Bam Margera. Was there one in particular that just taking your background out of it shocked you the most, or you were like, whoa, this is a lot even for me?
Well, I do want to comment on 2 of them, episodes 2 and 3. The 3rd episode is about the imposter, a man who from Rhode Island, who faked his death. He was a sexual predator, a rapist.
Yeah, Nicholas Rossi, correct?
Yeah, Nicholas Rossi, and he faked his death, took on a new identity. This is like in the late 20-teens. I mean, he's caught in an Edinburgh, Scotland hospital during COVID when he's like comatose with a respirator over his face, and he was identified as somebody wanted for 2 rape allegations in Utah by the tattoos on his arm. DNA later proved he was the same person, but he continues to deny that he is that person, even though his lawyer admits it in court. Anyway, fascinating that in this day and age somebody could do that. I know this kind of stuff, faking your ID, has happened in the past, but today with all the technology we have to track people, it seems hard to believe he got away with it for as long as he did. That's one. And the 2nd episode, The Girl Who Died Twice, law enforcement is still, I mean, there are people in law enforcement retired now who investigated that case, who believe that this girl who died twice was really murdered by her stepfather when she was 12 years old in 1981. There are others who believe, no, she ran away. She resurfaced years later. She now passed away of cancer, and that the real Mary Day was her name. The real Mary Day surfaced years later. But her own family isn't convinced that that woman who resurfaced is their sister. So that one had me.
And there were remains found in the backyard on this one.
You know what? Okay, good point. There were not remains, but cadaver dogs. 4 cadaver dogs separately hit on the same location, and it happened to be a part of the family's backyard where the sister was told not to play after Mary ran away. And when they dug it up, they found a belt buckle, a shoe, a sneaker, the size that Mary would have worn at that time, and a teddy bear or some little stuffed animal. Good evidence. What also happened that didn't make it into the show, only because we only had so many minutes to tell it, is that that family moved to the base where he was in the service shortly after Mary disappeared. And fast forward many years, that area was being developed, no longer a base, and they were just making sure there was no crime scenes around there. Cadaver dogs were sent on the base. And cadaver dogs hit again. And when the authorities said, well, who used to live here? It was that family. So cadaver dogs hit twice in the backyard of houses this family lived in. Somebody was buried in the seaside house, dug up, buried again at Fort Ord, dug up, and probably rolled up in a rug and thrown out in the Utah salt flats. That's the theory.
Yeah, I mean that's I think a pretty solid theory. I always I think I mentioned this last time you were on is that I consider you what I call a reliable narrator, and I think that's why you are so successful. Because when I see you pop up, I'm like, okay, I trust her. She's not going to lie. She's going to walk me through this. And I do you realize that that is the service you bring to shows like this?
So first of all, as a journalist imparting information to a public, you could not give me a higher compliment, right? Because as journalists, all we have is our reputation. And I have been told this by other people too. When they see me, they're like, okay, we're going to get the real story. I'm not going to report rumor, or if it's a rumor, I'll tell you it's a rumor. I will give you both sides, So that is a very high compliment, and I appreciate it. And I am aware because I've been told that. I love it. I love what I do. I
Yeah.
would love to do more of it because
But you're just doing what you do. You're not like, like this is just who you are, I believe. Like, I don't know you personally, but I believe this is what you actually are. So it's not, you're not putting on airs, you're just being you.
That's right. And I love a very involved story. And the facts, they stay in my head. People say, how do you remember the facts? I don't know. They stay in my head. I've had lawyers tell me they watch my live shot during a trial, and they're like, you know the case better than I do.
Do any of these cases over your long career, or even the Curious Case of, or even Natalia Grace, do any of these haunt you in a certain way? Because, you have to look at some of the grimmest aspects of humanity. How does that not stay with you? Because even watching these shows, some of them really stay with me.
So, like, if you were to spend a day with me, you would see how I remove myself from it. A little aromatherapy, a little soft music, get involved in a book, even though it may be a book about the Manson family, which we were talking about before.
Yeah, we were talking about. You. By the way, she recommends the book Chaos. If anybody, you might have read this already. Yeah.
Yeah, Tom O'Neill. Anyway, but I just learned to kind of remove myself. But what the cases that bother me the most are children who have been killed, or the infirm, people who really are the most vulnerable among us, whether they're elderly or disabled or children. And I covered a trial years ago, and it was moved to Miami, but it happened in Northern California, where a sex offender hadn't registered in the community he was in, and he actually kidnapped a little girl out of a mobile home in a mobile home park up in Northern California on the West Coast, and he allegedly raped her, but he buried her alive in 2 garbage bags. She was 7, and she was not found until after she had passed, weeks later. When we in the media were shown photos of the autopsy separate from the public, we were allowed in because we had to report on it. It was not broadcast. I ran out of the room in tears after looking at the photos. It just, her little finger was poking out of the garbage bag. She was clutching a little doll. She was in a fetal position. It was like awful. So those cases really, like, who does this to a child?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's dead today. He got the death penalty, but he died before he could be executed.
Well, thank God for that. Discovery ID, you have this long relationship with now. And I will say, I've noticed over the last couple of years, and this isn't a slam on them from but like they seem to be getting better and better with even their reporting. And, even like I was watching their Diddy series, or, it seems like the investigative reporting in this is getting stronger and stronger. And partly in thanks to you. Have you noticed that as well?
Well, it is true that they have a number of successful limited series. Some are, seasonal, but some are the limited series, like The Fall of Diddy. And I credit that to the leadership, Jason Sarlanis, who is now leading the network and looking for this type of story, take it in a different direction and looking for this type of story. There's always been a true crime audience.
Yeah.
But what he's doing is broadening the audience. I find that with the Curious Case of, I've talked to men who have told me that they don't really like watching murder stories, but they like Curious Case of, because we're not looking for murders. We're looking for crime stories that are twisted and, just kind of make you wonder.
Yeah, there's a bizarre element to the Curious Case of, and I guess the obvious question, and I think, you might not be able to answer this, is I would imagine if I was watching this, I was like, the season 2 already has to be in the works. Like, are you allowed to speak on this? Because in my head, I was like, oh, I think I have 6 stories for the second season. I'm like, if this is where we're going and this was done so wonderfully, is this already in the works? Are you allowed to say that?
I haven't been told anything officially, but with the success of the series, I wouldn't be surprised. But I can tell you, we have about 30 cases in the hopper just in case we have another season. We have a lot. In fact, somebody came to me today with another one that I want to give the team because it's another crazy story that doesn't involve murder. It's just a major scam artist.
And I also want to credit, you said the team, because these things, aren't done on an island. Like, there's a group of people that are putting these stories together, that editing, the music, all of these things that really lead to this really interesting viewing experience that I really think you're going to watch one and then you're going to want to watch the next one. And I credit that team that you speak of.
Yes, the company is Hot Snakes Media. That's the company that produces the series. And we have a retired FBI agent who's fabulous. The owners are a husband and wife team. She is a former prosecutor too. She's a lawyer. So, I have the law background. She does, the retired FBI agent. And then there's a team of producers also who are just good journalistic chops. And we investigate. I mean, we dig and dig and dig. And I'm part of that, which I'm really happy. I'm not just a face, and I want to, not just analyzing. I want to
in it.
Dig. Yeah, I want to be in it. So it's fun. I love working with these guys.
Well, this all started with the success of The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, which is now this kind of ongoing series. I mean, I think we might have put this to bed with the last one that just came out in January, I believe. Time means nothing anymore. But this story continued, and I think based off the success of that, we were able to get The Curious Case of greenlit because there are so many other stories. But where did you land with Natalia Grace? Because now I'm seeing they're making like a Netflix series, like an actual like acted out series with real actors in this. And also, I want to suggest this to you, Beth. I want to see you host a reunion for The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, where you bring everybody, like Andy Cohen on The Real Housewives. You bring everybody you'd ask the tough questions. We do a 3-part reunion.
So, picking up your question, so where did I land on all of that? First of all, I love your idea of hosting some sort of, and let's just put a pin on that. I'm going to tell ID that's your idea, and we got.
Yeah, but wait, can I just come and watch if that ever gets shot? Like, I don't need any. I just want to see it be filmed. Yeah.
So, but I flip-flopped during all of season 1.
Me too.
I did. But you know what they did? They were not sharing. The producers were not sharing everything with me in season 1 until I'd sit down for an interview. I sat down 5 times or so just for season 1. It wasn't one interview. I'd have to keep coming back because we'd get more stuff. It was an ongoing investigation, even as we're taping. And I always wore the same outfit and all that. But if you look closely, you'll see there's slight differences in my hair. Which drove me crazy. Anyway, they would give me information because they wanted my genuine reaction on camera. And when I reacted, what? I'm going that was real. I was like, what? And I do tend to make faces. I used to have judges tell me in court, you cannot make a face when your witness is being cross-examined because the jury can see you.
You used to be chided for making faces in actual court?
Yes, I would roll my eyes. I'd go, and I had to learn not to do that. And that was in the early days, in my, early trials, not by the time I was doing bigger cases, but that was when I was a young pup learning the courtroom. Anyway, but I tend to be expressive. So, I would be, that's how I was on television. By the second and third seasons, we knew at that point.
Yeah, it became a different thing about the families that Natalia was with. But I think the dental records for me was like, oh, okay, this isn't a big mystery in terms of her age, but it was really fascinating the people surrounding her, which seemed to get crazier and crazier for somebody that already had this really insane upbringing and had been through so much already.
Correct. My old trial bureau chief in the Manhattan DA's office had his 10 rules for trying cases. Rule number 1, no witness, no case. And I think rule number 7 was crazy people find each other. You got a crazy witness, you better, take a look at the other side. That's kind of this story of Natalia Grace. They all kind of found each other, magnets for each other.
Yeah, you get new characters kept popping up, and I'd be like, whoa, this is another unique personality that you're like, oh, I thought I saw the father, but now I have the new adopted father. It's really interesting.
Yes. But what I found really very, very sad and it angered me in season 2 was when the dental records proved that the family knew her age within
Yes.
weeks of adopting her. And they did not tell the court a few years later when they were re-aging her to 22, from 9 or 8 to 22.
Yeah.
They didn't tell the court that. And we proved in the court of public opinion. The court of law acquitted Michael, but they didn't have, that's Michael Barnett, the adoptive father, they didn't have all the evidence we have. The jurors weren't allowed to know about the age dispute, right? They could only try Michael on abandoning a disabled person, a dependent person is called, abandoning and a neglect of a dependent person, whether you're infirm because of age or disability or whatever. Nothing to do with abandonment of a child. And that really angered me that the Barnetts, in my opinion, perpetrated a fraud on the court by not letting the court know everything that they knew about her age.
And then it follows Michael Barnett. And, if this is a man made for reality television in a sense, because he is so dramatic and he wants to be the hero of his own story. And there is just no way. So it's this interesting push-pull that you're watching. And also this Natalia Grace just keeps getting just pushed around, even though, she's a very interesting character in her own right. And you can say she's like the product of her upbringing. But this story just kept continuing where I was like, oh my, and then she winds up on the cover of People magazine. Like she's a cover star, a cover story on People magazine, I believe. And I just thought, once again, from where you started in court TV and things like O.J. Simpson, where we have turned these stories, like The Curious Case of, these are all stories that are front page worthy topics now. And that I don't believe was as much the case in the 80s and the early 90s.
Probably you're right about that. I think that the interest has grown probably grown in terms of true crime and spread out. It's not just like a murder, because boy, back in the day at Court TV, it seemed like every other trial I covered was a spousal murder. I covered a lot of spousal murders. Some were high profile, like Scott Peterson, but not all. Or something within the family, killing a child or a parent. But now, we just have so many places that we can find out about stories. I just go on YouTube or get on Facebook or Instagram, and people are posting their experiences, and you can go down that hole and find a good story.
I was thinking about this in terms of what you just said, and it is that everybody can post about something now. And I've noticed this, even focusing a lot on reality television. I've noticed a lot of people without law degrees are now acting like they're lawyers. Yeah. They understand the legal system, and they are explaining, and usually sometimes to a really large audience. And I feel like sometimes they're getting critical things wrong because they have not kind of learned the proper channels or learned the channels enough so that they know when they can break them and push a story forward. Have you noticed this at all? And do you think it kind of brings down journalism, and especially in these topics, which are very important? Do you think that kind of brings down the overall discourse?
I have definitely noticed it. It is something that I will turn off a podcast once I've heard the first error. I'm not listening anymore. These are citizens.
Oh, Beth, you've just turned off my podcast. I'm so sorry. Oh, wow. Oh, no. Oh, no.
No, I mean, these citizen journalists, everybody, if you don't have an editor above you, somebody who can say, wait a second, you can't say that, or you better get some legal vetting, you should know what you're talking about, right? So consult a lawyer before you go on and start interpreting the law. And I find that some people are just talking off the cuff, and they don't, they're almost there, but they're not quite right.
And they're going with their gut. They're going with their gut. And I think the law is not necessarily going with your gut all the time.
No, correct. Going with your gut is helpful for like trial lawyers, because, that's a juror. That's jurors, are supposed to listen to the facts and the law, but there's, they go with their guts too, as long as they can justify it by the evidence following the law. So, I mean, it's interesting to hear people's opinions about cases, but no one should hold themselves out as an expert unless they really are an expert on the law. Plenty of journalists learn enough to do a really good job reporting on cases, but they do have, in the mainstream media at least, they've got bosses, they've got editors and supervisors who can, tell them, look, you can't say that, or let's check this fact first.
Yeah, you really have to trust those editors, but it is interesting. Seems like it's the Wild West on like TikTok and things like that, where and this is just now me showing my age, where I'm like old man shaking fist into sky, where I'm like, come on, we can't just put this out there. That's not believable, and that's like blind item culture. Going back to like the O.J. Simpson, Scott Peterson. I mean, you've covered some of the most interesting cases that everybody, like Casey Anthony. How do you think time will view some of these cases, because now we are decades removed from O.J. Simpson, Casey Anthony, and Scott Peterson? I know there was a docuseries on him last year, and I'm still shocked because I'm kind of resolute in how I believe about things. I'm open to new information, but there's always a contingency of people that will still believe that these people are completely innocent. It was a huge frame job. Do you think time helps these cases or just muddies the water even more?
Well, it's definitely muddied the water with Scott Peterson, because there's a whole new generation of people who were not born, or maybe were born or still in diapers when he was being tried. And his crime happened in Christmas Eve 2002, and he was tried in the summer of 2004. But this whole new generation has bought into Peterson's family's narrative, which is revisionist history. I was at the trial. I know what happened. And I am adamant in my belief that the jury got it right, and that he's not an innocent man sitting in prison. And I support the work of the Innocence Network, the Innocence Projects all over.
They picked up his case, right? Or a division of the Innocence Project picked up elements of wanting to test a van, I believe, or certain elements of the case, which I was like, wow, I really trust the Innocence Project. And I think a lot of people are pointing to them saying, this is why we believe that this guy is innocent.
Well, it's actually not the Innocence Network, Innocence Project, which is headquartered here in New York, where I am. It's its own Los Angeles Innocence Project. It's not part of the national network, and it's funded, I'm told, by an exoneree who got a big payout after he was exonerated and established this place in Los Angeles. But it's not part of the California project. Is that's my understanding. It's independent. In fact, I believe the Innocence Project in New York here, which is sort of like their website, takes in a lot of information from all around the country. They put up a disclaimer saying we have nothing to do.
But isn't it interesting? You see that like Innocence Project, and you kind of just like, oh, I trust them, and it's not necessarily. That's why you really got to do your research and read. We got to be discerning as an audience, especially if we're going to devour these episodes or these cases or these real life events. We got to really do our own digging, because we are misled so many times.
Correct. But that said, when I did some commentary on this new effort to do some new DNA testing to try to exonerate him, I was like, go for it. I'm all for it. You're not going to find anything. But I do believe that if anybody comes up with something that should be tested that hadn't been tested, and this person sitting in prison, they should be allowed to test. And there are a lot of prosecutors who throw up roadblocks and say, no, we don't want to allow it. I do think they should be allowed to. They go test that van that had been examined already by authorities, and see if you come up with Lacey's DNA. They're not going to.
All this hinges on some people's ability to not just ever be able to admit the truth and admit their darkest moment, and they will, and I think it's proven now in life is that if you commit to a lie, or even on, the curious case of Nicholas Rossi, just commit to the bit. You'll go pretty far if you commit to the bit. And I think that's what Nicholas Rossi, he was doing a fake British accent. He was, he was like in full character. He made this a show of shows. It was like Willy Wonka.
Let me tell you, I communicated with him a few times. He wouldn't give us an interview, and probably, it's good advice by his attorney, because he hasn't been to trial yet in Utah. But I was communicating with him, not just in writing, but on the phone a few months ago, or earlier, or last year. And
what does that feel like when you're communicating on the phone? What is the?
Well, I had to call him Arthur. He insisted I call him Arthur.
Arthur Knight, yes.
Yes, even though he's Nicholas Rossi in the jail system in the state of Utah. He's in jail, not prison yet, because he hasn't been convicted. And he's Nicholas Rossi, and the mail goes to Nicholas Rossi, but I have to write the letter, Dear Arthur. Yeah, Arthur Knight. He goes Arthur Brown, Arthur Knight. he just was speaking in circles, and he's trying to be real smart, he thinks he's outsmarting me. Well,
Yeah.
how much time are you going to devote to this? It'll be an hour program, of course, with commercials. It's less programming. And he said, well, you can't really tell my story. It said in his British accent, you can't really tell my story in an hour. And I said, well, give us an interview. We'll give you 2 hours. Okay, give us an interview. But he didn't work.
The Jody Hillebrand episode, obviously we know the Ruby Frankie story, a lot of us, and the 8 passengers and obviously mommy bloggers are very big over this last decade. But Jody Hillebrand, this was really interesting that you focused on her and not the Ruby Frankie stuff, because a lot of this hinges on Jody Hillebrand, because Ruby Frankie, was kind of not taken in by, well, I mean, in a sense, but then they became, partners in crime, if it were. Like, what was your take on Jody Hillebrand?
So, we wanted a different way into the story because Ruby's story had been told. And I've had people come up to me saying, I didn't really know anything about Jody. I knew Ruby's story. So it's interesting, you say that. Jody, to me, I think she was in love with Ruby. And,
but she seemed like she had interesting relationships with a lot of her clientele.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if that was a pattern of behavior, that she maybe fell in love with a lot of people that she worked with.
Well, she probably did. I don't have facts beyond Ruby, but I do know that she was dividing couples, not uniting them. And as a marriage counselor, family counselor, she was supposed to help them through their problems, but she was making the women feel more liberated and telling them that their husbands were sexual perverts if they masturbated once or looked at porn.
Yeah, you have not a great, you have an interview of a gentleman who went through this, like you can tell he is scarred from this experience.
Yes.
And he even talks about Ruby Frankie's husband, of like, this guy in 10 years is going to be thinking completely different. He is literally a prisoner of all of this behavior.
Correct. And we had a couple of men on who had gone through this, and this is in the Mormon community. So, Jody, she's in prison today. Ruby's in prison. I wrote to both of them. They didn't respond to see if they would talk, but they are where they belong. When you see what happened to those children.
That is the disturbing thing. And Jody, sitting there in a 8,000 square foot compound or something that they searched, and they found folders of Ruby Frankie and things that she had written. And it just went down a really dark path. And I think, Hillebrand was a therapist. How does this case highlight like the dangers of like unchecked authority in mental health professions? Because I feel like that's a lot of these stories. It's like unchecked authority.
Correct. And it all stayed within the church. I'm not dumping on the LDS church, but it is the elders in the church would recommend Jody to couples, for therapy. So they weren't going outside and getting any other perspectives. And Jody had, she knew the Mormon world, and, she took advantage of it. She saw an opportunity, one could argue, to have relationships with these women and liberate these women, so to speak. And she took advantage of it, doing exactly the opposite of what the church wanted her to do.
And it's interesting in all of these stories, we watch them from the comfort of our own home, like eating a block of cheese in our bed, or that's just me. And you're like, I would never fall for this. Like, this is, there's so many red flags already. And just like we were talking earlier about the doomsday cat cult, I just think like, man, there are so many red flags in this Jody Hillebrand story, but it kind of speaks to this innocence that we all want to believe in something, and we all want to be told the right things to do, and we want to give away power because life can be really scary. And I think that is really interesting that there is so much abuse of that trust.
Yes, and she found a vulnerable point or whatever in the women, and she exploited it. Like, your husband's a pervert, and because they masturbated. So you saw it in the show. These women were locking their husbands out of the bedrooms and just divorcing themselves from their husbands, all because Jody convinced them that their husbands were unfit.
Yeah, and like they were talking about like the aspect of porn and how evil that is. And it is very interesting, the evil that is, and then she ends up committing the ultimate evil, and she is in prison for it. You started off the season with a banger, The Curious Case of Bam Margera. Now, Bam, of course, from Jackass fame, we grew up with Bam, a lot of us, and he has had so many problems where, you have Steve-O in this, and he is a shining example of somebody that's committed to sobriety, has turned his life. I mean, he's still crazy as heck, but he has turned his life around. And the Bam Margera one really focuses on a guardianship battle. How has this compared to other ones that you have covered in the past?
Well, this was really an outlier, really very different. And in fact, some people would write in and say, I thought this was supposed to be about Bam. Bam even posted on Instagram.
I know. He goes, I turned this on. I go, what? Yeah.
He said, well, I guess you wouldn't have gotten as many eyeballs if it wasn't called, the Bam Margera. It's really about the two women, one, the guardian, and the other one who was fighting against the guardianship, sort of an armchair lawyer in New Jersey saying, this doesn't sound right. So it's about the battle between these two women, and he's a pawn in the middle of it. Listen, he's doing well today. He married his then girlfriend who's in the show, but we blurred her face because we were shooting video. She didn't give permission to blur her face, but she's his wife now. He seems like he's doing really well. But for me, I had to go down that guardianship, conservatorship hole because that is not something I typically cover. And I had to, learn about it and comment on it.
What are your first, when you start diving into something that you aren't completely familiar with, what is that experience? What you love about all of this? Are you is this you're oh, I'm in heaven right now, being able to research something that I don't know and get my initial take on something?
Yeah, I'm in heaven usually when it's a crime and I'm learning the facts.
Heaven might be the wrong word, by the way. Maybe just sorry.
But it's not so heavenly for me when it's a completely different area of law because I have to learn it fast. Lawyers, like doctors, we specialize in an area, even though when you get licensed, you can theoretically practice any area. But I won't go on TV, at the last minute and comment on a bankruptcy or something, because that's not my wheelhouse, right? Crime is what I know. So that was something new for me. So I had to learn it. I learned it enough for the show, but it was a vertical learning curve and at times a little painful. But it's okay.
Yeah, it's a great start to the season, and you have this guardianship with entrepreneur this Lima Javerovic. I don't know if I'm saying her name correctly, and this YouTuber and attorney BJ. And I thought it was just a very interesting, this fight over celebrity, and I'm wondering if the legal system can handle these cases that involve celebrity and addiction. When you throw addiction, there's one thing, but when you throw celebrity on that, it adds this whole other element that I sometimes wonder if there needs to be this separate side of the legal thing of throw this into the celebrity pile.
Yeah, well, the celebrity cases obviously attract a lot of attention, and they get really scrutinized and reported on, and that can be. It's another layer of the case that the lawyers have to deal with. And I've had many lawyers in the courtroom in high profile cases tell me this is a headache I don't really need. Make sure that my hair is properly brushed in the back because the camera's catching the back of my head or something like that. They don't need this publicity. Oh, I was at the courthouse, by the way, last week for Luigi Mangione. Talk about publicity. Anyway, and all his groupies. That's another story, though.
By the way, that's a great episode of The Curious Case of, not even Luigi Mangione, the groupies. Did you see the he put on his website, if you're going to send, I think something like nude photos, only send 5 because I can't receive more than that. Did you see that?
I didn't see that one, but I saw the women out of 200 people waiting in line on the 15th floor of the downtown Manhattan State Courthouse. Probably 95% of them were young women, and some in little spaghetti straps, boots and short skirts. And I was like, oh, I talked to one of the court officers, and he's like, look, I don't know how many are going to get in the courtroom. And the courtroom was full, but mainly with media. Only about 15 members of the public got in. I didn't get in. And people were lining up in the middle of the night. But he said, we're worried that one of them might flash them in the courtroom. That's what they were worried about. it didn't happen, at least not to my knowledge. But
it's like a Harry Styles concert, you know. This is the but it's like the culture of celebrity has like so ingrained itself in crime now. You know, it is like these are. I mean, there's like a rush on tickets. I'm shocked that they weren't selling these on StubHub. But it's interesting. Like you're still like covering this beat. You're still there trying to get into the courthouse. And I thought that's very, very interesting when celebrity gets involved, or we actually make celebrities of these people.
Right.
What are the other, I mean, we're winding down here a little bit. I think we have about like 10 more minutes here, but like, what are you allowed to maybe tease potential stories that, I mean, you said you have a bucket of 30 potentially. Are there things that really interest you more than other stories, or you're like, I hope we cover this if we do this again?
So, I mean, I don't have the list in front of me, so I can't really tell you the cases. I know several have been submitted for review, and like one I just learned about today, which I haven't even given the team yet, is about a woman who's been carrying on a scam for money for years regarding her son who's already passed away. So I don't really know too much about it. I'm about to go down that hole. And I think there may be some more cults, but I really don't have.
Yeah, there's definitely more cults. Like, I mean, it seems like cults are like a dime a dozen these days. I wanted to go back to the O.J. Simpson trial really briefly. And, you know, Court TV, obviously heavy in coverage for that. But I remember that as a kid and really realizing, you know, once that Bronco chase happened and everybody was tuning in to one of the stations to watch this Bronco, it was, you know, we're in this different land and we had the dream team and we still talk about this. And then there was like the civil trial and OJ passed away last year. To me, this was always, even as a kid, a fairly obvious case. But this is another one that this man held to his innocence. He was proven, or he was, you know, by a jury of his peers, he was innocent. But then he gets arrested in a memorabilia shakedown. Where do you stand? Where did you stand on OJ at the time? And did that ever change?
So the day of the Bronco chase, I happen to remember, it was June 17th, 1994, because it was my last day in the Manhattan DA's office, and I started at Court TV 10 days later. And I was watching basketball playoffs on my couch with a friend from the DA's office at the time, and all of a sudden a white Ford Bronco came up on the TV, and he pointed at it and said, "That's your future." So as it turns out, I actually didn't go to hit the murder trial. I was doing behind-the-scenes stuff on DNA, you know, from the newsroom. I covered his next case, which was the road rage case in Miami in the fall of 2001.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Right in the middle of the anthrax scare. So everybody was up in Boca Raton because a man had just died of inhaling anthrax at American Media. And anthrax was sent to through the U.S. Postal Service in Washington and to some anchors and in Rockefeller Center and elsewhere in New York, right? Remember? So everybody's fixated on other parts of the country, the Pentagon and Ground Zero. So I'm there in Florida and the locals are there. And in the beginning of the case, maybe the first few days were like a 2-week trial. He was acquitted. He should have been acquitted that time. His lawyers and OJ asked me to lunch, quick lunch at a little Chinese restaurant. So I went, and OJ was sitting on my left and the lawyers on my right, round table, and my food came first. And OJ leaned over and started eating off my plate. And I tell everybody, when OJ Simpson is next to you with a fork and a knife in his hand, let him eat all he wants.
Oh my gosh.
So, and then but fast forward to 2008, I covered his hotel robbery case too.
Which he went to prison for. I mean, he finally went to prison. But what, you know, it always just seems very interesting. But this kind of was like the one that started it all, and then we got this amazing documentary from it. You know, Made in America, I believe it was called, and then we got the Ryan Murphy show. And I was also then wondering, has anybody played you on a narrative? Like, has anybody played Beth on has Sarah Paulson played you yet?
No, I'm not aware of that. She played Marsha Clark, I think, right?
Yeah, but I feel like she could do a really good. I feel like she'll play you one day.
I mean, James Patterson had me as it was like a little character, just as somebody outside the courthouse, me and Anderson Cooper and somebody else. So I was named in a James Patterson book. Is
that the Epstein book?
No, it's like one a long time ago. And I was named in one of the Murder, She Wrote books, but that's it. And years ago, when that American Lawyer article came out about me, when I was still in the DA's office, there was a crime show that was a scripted show called Equal Justice or something. And Sarah Jessica Parker played a prosecutor, and her name was ADA, Assistant DA Harris, and I was ADA Karras. And some people, she had long curly hair like I did at the time, and some people told me that she was modeled after me, but it didn't last more than a season or two.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but that's it. That's all I know.
Is it harder to do the work that you do with the byproduct of some of this is that you have this sort of I mean, I don't want to say fame, but people know you. You're a recognized face. Like, is it harder to do is that something you're like, that is so useless, I do not need that? Is there an element of it that you enjoy, or is it just a pain in the butt sometimes?
Well, I tried to stay grounded. It doesn't go to my head. I'm not recognized as much now as I used to when I was on TV every day. I'd get on an airplane and the flight attendants knew me, or the car rental place, because I was traveling. It's not as much today, but I don't let it go to my head, and I'm always appreciative of anyone who tells me that they're a fan and they watch me and they trust me. And I try to give people attention and treat them the way I want to be treated. And I've seen, and if people want a photo or an autograph, I never say no. At least I don't believe I've ever said no. I've seen people who let their celebrity go to their heads and think that they don't have time for their fans, and that's not good.
Yeah, that's not you. Do you finally? I guess I was just wondering, what was the first thing as a kid that made you fall in love with the law, or even like want to head down this road in the first place?
Since I was 13, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I've thought about this, and I'll get a little bit personal here. And it's just because I'm trying to understand it myself. See, law is very logical, and I grew up in a very chaotic home because there was a lot of illness. I had disabled brothers and a mentally ill mother. It was just like my father was absent except weekends, and it was very chaotic and very sad, actually. But law, I threw myself into my work because I had control over that. I didn't have control over the home environment. It was loving, but it was problematic. It was sad. And so I was focused, and I think the law, just because it was logical and there was structure to it, and it just made sense to me. So I gravitated to it. It was going to be that or medicine, but I didn't end up taking the science classes in college. And so I thought about it afterwards, and I said, I don't want to go another 2 years to get the science credits and then go to med school. So I went to law school.
Could you have ever imagined this career that was in front of you at 13 years old, where it's taken you?
No, but I always was a speaker, and I was class president for 4 years, and I was always like out there and active. And so I'm not surprised that I'm doing something, semi-public, right? Because, it just,
I think there's a natural fit here, but in the legal system, since you've been in this for so long, does the legal system still work in your opinion? And I know that's a very broad question, but there's so much not renewed interest, but there's so much focus on the law right now, whether it be political or these cases that we talk about in the curious case of. Is the legal system still doing what it is meant to be doing?
I believe it is. It's not perfect. I don't think any system is perfect, but I think it's one of the best out there in terms of other legal systems in other countries. So I think as long as people still do their duty as jurors, people want to get out of jury duty. I wish I could get picked for a jury. I keep getting not picked.
There's no way they would ever pick you for a jury. There is no way you would ever, at this point, you'll never make a jury ever again.
I would love to, and I think it's one of the highest civic duties a person has. You should vote, and you should sit on a jury.
Yeah. And then all the fan reaction, or the reactions to this show, because all 6 episodes, I want to remind people, it's Discovery ID, but you can stream all 6 on Max right now. In fact, it is like the front page. It'll say the curious case of, you just click that thing and you're in for a adventure. But have you had, what is the strongest reactions, or the ones that you've noticed have garnered the strongest reactions in terms of response?
Well, BJ's, the very first episode got a lot of response just because people were still taking sides, Lima and BJ, right? So that's
the Bam Margera one, the first
Bam
one.
Margera,
Yeah.
right. So that got a lot of response. The funeral, episode 4, the funeral home, that got a lot of response because, we all have, if you haven't yet, you will at some point in your life you have to deal with death and funeral.
Yeah, guys, that's John and Carrie Halford's Return to Nature funeral home that left more than 190 bodies to rot instead of properly cremating them. So that's the basis of that episode.
And giving some families cement dust, making them think it's their loved one's ashes. Ugh, please. Ugh. So that one garnered a lot of, well, they all actually did. But the ones that I saw a reaction to Bam and the Halford story.
Yeah, and you guys, this is why shows like this is not tooting my own horn, but this is like, we got to carry the message here, because this is one of those things that you're going to discover. Yeah, like, you don't need to watch it like right when it premieres, even though that's great. You have now 6 episodes that you can watch this next month to take your mind off your actual craziness in your real life, and you can put yourself into these stories. And then you said you listen to really mellow music to like calm yourself down. What are you listening to right now? What does Beth listen to music-wise?
Well, this morning I was listening to piano music, and it was like jazzy piano music. That's it. And like standards and jazz and maybe even some classical, but it was just all piano.
Do you watch any television?
Oh, yes.
What do you watch?
Oh, yes, on the weekends. Well, I will stream a series. I haven't started White Lotus yet.
Oh, I'm curious to hear your take on, you'll be 3 episodes in by Sunday.
I was waiting a couple weeks. I wanted to save up because I like to binge. I just finished Night Agent. A friend of mine is in season 2 in Night Agent, Lou Hertham. They're going to have a season 3, so I'm very excited about that because it's being shot here in New York. What else have I watched? I don't know.
Yeah, try Severance. I'm really into Severance right now. I keep that's on Apple TV. I'm really enjoying that.
Everyone's telling me that. I started like episode 1 and it's like, wait a minute, you leave, you have a different personality at work. You leave. It's like, oh, I can't go there. So I think I better give it another shot because everyone loves it.
Well, I have been so looking forward to this. We were supposed to do this early January, you guys, but I had sinus surgery and I was in a world of hurt, and they were so nice to reschedule this. And I think they knew I was so excited, and it has proved worth the wait on my part. So thank you for all of your time. And you guys, The Curious Case of, go back and check out that Natalia Grace series. There's 3 seasons of that, but this 6 episodes, which I think we're going to get definitely a second season, or I hope we do. Stream it all now on Max, so hopefully she'll have to come back down the line, okay? It was great talking to you.
Lovely talking to you, too. We'll do it again.
Thank you.